Good for the back.
Otherwise, they still don't come to the front. All right.
I need my sunglasses.
Well, good evening, everybody. We've just come from a great dinner at Johnny's, and I can promise you, you're in for a very fun evening with these great guests we have. So we're thrilled to welcome you here this evening as we embark on this grand adventure together. My name is Sarah Gleason-Ross. I am the Director of College Counseling. I'm currently in my second year here at Gilman. After, I'm not even going to tell you how many years of work in education and admissions and college counseling. And Gilman continues to delight me with its bright and dynamic students and amazing faculty and our bright vision for the future. Before we begin our formal program with our guests, I just wanted to speak very briefly about our philosophy and approach to college counseling. This is a philosophy which is very much in line with Gilman's mission. As college counselors, we seek to know our students and to know them extremely well. And in so doing, we can best support them and guide them and challenge them to find their next school home. That place where they will continue to thrive, live lives of purpose, and continue to become the best versions of themselves. So it's all about finding that fit. That school where your son will flourish academically, athletically, artistically, and socially. And it's also about guiding each student in a supportive and caring way, knowing that at the heart of this sometimes stressful process, after all, is a 17-year-old boy. So how do we accomplish this goal? How do we go about finding the best match when there are over 2,000 four-year colleges and universities in the United States alone, all the while balancing the health and well-being of our students? So here's what we do. Our formula is simple. We spend hours building trust, getting to know each student extremely well. We spend hours investigating programs, spending times with colleagues such as our colleagues on the stage, looking for schools that will be a good fit. We spend hours poring over essays and applications, and even more hours advocating on each student's behalf. This is a grand partnership, and together we will accomplish this goal. Many of you have already filled out the parent questionnaire, and I thank you for that. And for those of you who are still working on it, thank you in advance. This is a very important document which lays important groundwork for our understanding of your son, your expectations for his college process, and the best ways we can work together. We recognize that this process can be sometimes fraught with challenge, and for that reason, it is a collaborative effort. For some of you, and I'm guessing maybe most of you, this is your first child to apply to college. And for others, you've been through this process multiple times. I think those seasoned parents will agree that no child and no process is the same. And I'm sure that we all can agree that the college application process has changed drastically since the day when you and I applied to college. So we believe that with knowledge comes power. And as overwhelming as this journey may seem at first, step by step, meeting by meeting, we will advance to our objective together. So beginning with tonight's program, followed by the students' program, which we will hold on January 22nd, and ongoing communication over the course of the year, you and your son will be fully equipped with the knowledge necessary to make good decisions and achieve our ultimate goal. For I can assure you that every Gilman graduate finds a college home, and you are not doing this alone, far from it. Once your son completes his questionnaire, we ask that he book an appointment to meet with his college counselor. The first meeting is a getting to know you meeting, a time for the counselor to learn more about the student's interests, personality, academic accomplishments, and collegiate aspirations. Once we meet with your son, we would love to meet with you, and we welcome an opportunity to meet with you. And we hope that then you also finish your questionnaire. And by March break, we hope to have developed a preliminary list, and we strongly encourage you to take advantage of the spring break to visit colleges. The Ames College Fair will take place in early May, And we have scheduled a program in athletic recruitment for March 10th at 1 p.m. And details about these programs will obviously be forthcoming. Mr. Baker and Mr. Herman will be taking a group of students on a college tour to New England in June. And there will also be a trip going to visit historically black colleges and universities in March. The essay workshop takes place at the end of August. And as I said, we'll be in touch with you about all these opportunities. As I said, you're not alone. You have an expert team of college counselors behind you. We stand ready to support you and your son at each and every turn. For some of our students, this means working to diminish the anxiety surrounding the process. Others may require more encouragement and motivation. College counseling takes many forms, so I encourage you to take full advantage of the knowledge and experience offered you as we have walked this journey countless times. And I'd love to introduce our team, and before I do, I just can tell you with incredible assurance that I've never worked with a finer group of people, and I've worked for a really long time. So Gilman is really fortunate. I am really fortunate to have inherited such a great team. First, I want to introduce Ms. Sawyer. Is she? I think she's hiding out front. There she is. All right, you gotta know Ms. Sawyer. Vivian Sawyer's been with Gilman since 1972, when she worked with Upward Bound, and she's been in the college office since 2004. So she's a key person for us all to know. Justin Baker here has been with Gilman for 11 years. He started out as an English teacher and baseball coach and moved into college counseling 6 years ago. He still teaches 2 senior English electives and coaches middle school baseball. Anna Follansby has been with Gilman for 6 years. Once upon a time, she worked with one of our guests at Providence College. She also teaches English to the 10th grade and serves as advisor to senior encounter and coaches intramural ultimate frisbee. And Matt Herman has been with Gilman for 9 years. He teaches U.S. history and coaches JV golf. His favorite thing. All right.
The most coveted job at the school.
Very.
Yeah.
That's a gig.
All right, so on to our distinguished panelists. We are very grateful to have such experienced and knowledgeable deans of admission with us this evening. As you will soon see, our goal tonight is to pull back the veil of mystery, to show you what a collaborative process this is. Not only collaboration between us, but the collaboration between the College Counseling Office and each admission office as well. For we all share a common goal, finding the best school for each student. So I'm going to go this alphabetically, starting with Raul Fonts in the middle. Raul started his admissions career at his undergraduate alma mater, King's College, moving on to his graduate school alma mater, LaSalle University, where he also earned a master's in education. In 2000, Raul moved to Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island, and there he has moved steadily through the ranks in the admissions office, when in 2015 he was named Associate Vice President and Dean of Admission and Financial Aid. Kate Jacobson on the right graduated from Millersville University with both her undergraduate and graduate degrees in English, and after obtaining her master's, she was selected to be a college advisor for the College Advising Corps, which is a nationally recognized AmeriCorps program. She then joined the admissions office at Franklin and Marshall College in 2010, where she's had various territories and assignments over the years. Currently, Kate leads the visit program and is responsible for recruiting students from Maryland and Gilman, Delaware, and the Princeton area of New Jersey. And finally, on my right is Jeremiah Quinlan, who is a graduate of Yale College, was appointed Dean of Undergraduate Admission there in 2013, and is now Dean of Undergraduate Admissions and Financial Aid. He is responsible for Yale's outreach efforts to high-achieving students from around the world, the college's selection, recruitment, and financial aid process, development of admissions and financial aid policy and practices, and the advancement of Yale's position as a global leader in affordability and undergraduate education. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed guests. So I'm now going to turn the mic over to Matt Herman, who is going to be our MC for the evening, and it'll be a portion of guided questions, and then think hard about questions that you might have for our guests. Thank you.
All right, good evening. Ms. Jacobson, Mr. Fonts, and Mr. Quinlan, can you all hear me okay? Thank you again for sharing your time and expertise with us. And would you please introduce your school, and what you think the appropriate role of the parent is in the college search process. Ms. Jacobson, would you like to begin?
Sure thing. So Franklin and Marshall College is a small liberal arts school in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half from here. 2,400 entirely undergraduate population, and we focus on research, undergraduate research. So 2/3 of our students will conduct research, and 1/3 are published before they graduate. Lancaster's a really cool city, and I'm not the only one that says that. Forbes voted us as one of the top 10 coolest cities, and it's always being voted as a great place to travel, and it's not far, so please come up and join us. Check out F&M, and great place. I think the role of a parent in the college-going process is one of a co-pilot. I didn't say backseat driver, I didn't say driver, but I think a co-pilot. And so I think it's a lot about the guidance and support that you can offer your child appropriately throughout the process in helping them understand just the process and keeping them on task with when things need to happen. But I do think that your role is not to, grab the wheel when you need to. It's just to help kind of point out things that you see as you're enjoying the ride with them. It's their ride, it's where they're going, the journey is all about them, and so I think it's really important for you to remain a nice, quiet co-pilot.
I'm thinking about that. Yeah, I might have been too much of a pilot and not much of a co-pilot. I'm Raul Fonts. I'm the Associate Vice President, Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Providence College. Providence is a private Catholic liberal arts school in Providence, Rhode Island. We are a school of 4,000 undergraduates, about 1,000 graduate students, so it's predominantly undergraduate. About 38% of our students are in our business school, so we have a large business presence on campus. But there's a very strong liberal arts foundation, including a Western civilization component that's required of all freshmen and sophomore students at Providence. We're a school that competes at the highest level in athletics, Division I, and we're in the Big East Conference. And I'll share later that I've gone through the process twice, through the college process twice, and I survived, and I'm still standing, and it can be a really positive experience. And I'll say this, I have 3 boys, okay? One just graduated from college, one is a sophomore, thankfully, at Providence College, and the third one is a sophomore in high school. And I will say that they're all different, and the process is different for every child. Certainly, the first one, I felt like I was going through the process. I'll never forget the first interview that I had to go to with him. I thought I was the one going for the interview, and I was really nervous, and I couldn't understand it. Why am I so nervous? I do this for a living. Why am I nervous? But I was a wreck. I wasn't telling him that, but I was. But it all turned out great. And I will say this, some of the best conversations that I've had with my kids, with my boys, were on trips to visit colleges. I'll never, ever, ever take those back. I mean, it was incredible. Enjoy this process, okay? I know, you think I'm crazy. I know what you read. I know what you hear. It's not like going to the dentist. It's not a painful process. It could be one of the most positive experiences you ever have. It's worked. I'm 2 for 2, I think, and I'm sure I'll be 3 for 3. I actually learn something each time that I do it, too. I think I got better at it after the first time. And I like the co-pilot analogy. I also think that listening, just listening, and you know, the more you can listen and offer to listen and to provide appropriate feedback, I think that's my advice. They're all going to be great, and you've got tremendous support here, so I wouldn't be too anxious about this process, even if you're a first time. I can tell you that. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeremiah Quinlan. Yale University is a research university located in New Haven, Connecticut. We have currently 6,000 undergraduate students and about 6,000 graduate students in 12 different graduate and professional schools: medical school, law school, forestry, business, nursing. We're the only Ivy League school with 4 graduate schools in the arts: art, architecture, music, and theater. And we have 6,000 undergraduates. Everyone, no matter their major, we offer 80 different majors at the university. All are members of Yale College. We like to think that we are the sort of world-class research university that focuses the most on undergraduate education because of our size. Undergraduates now are over 50% and have of the total student body at Yale, but also have access to all of the great resources at our graduate and professional schools, whether it's through 5-year master's programs, research at the medical school, et cetera. We also pride ourselves in the fact that we have strengths among our peer group that are very, very diverse across the academic disciplines. A third of our students major in the arts and humanities, a third in the social sciences, and a third in science and engineering. And we actually really like the broad diversity of academic interests and the fact that it's about a third, a third, a third in terms of what students choose to major in, because we really feel like we are the institution for students who want to study science but not have to give up really advanced music, or are very interested in journalism but want to be really good science writers. We want to offer strengths across the disciplines and have students interested in all of those areas. I would say that I'm not going to be as helpful as some of my other colleagues up here on the panel. I have a 3-year-old daughter at home who I was just on the phone with outside, and she told me that today at school she built a wall out of paint. So I don't know what to make of that, but it sounded really exciting. And my biggest concern with her is getting her out of her comfortable pajamas and putting on clothes in the morning. But that may be your concern too. That may be what you're dealing with. The best advice I can give you, and it sort of just is similar to what you've heard already, is that I think you could try to make this as positive a process as Raul mentions. You want to try and model some really good behaviors for your son throughout this process, whether it's being thoughtful about the choices that he or is making in terms of what schools to visit, whether it's being graceful on a college tour and not barging in front of other parents to ask the first question, whether it is allowing that time for listening or protecting your relationship so that you're deciding this is the time of the week that we are going to talk about this process. We are not going to make this an all-encompassing conversation that basically becomes this fraught relationship builder. We want to make this something that's talked about when we're cleaning up from dinner and doing the dishes together, or at halftime of the Ravens game, or whenever it is that you are going to decide you're going to talk about this. That is the time that you should be picking that and trying to protect that. And you can really model for your son some of the behaviors that they're going to have to really get good at in college, whether it's organizing time, being mindful of deadlines, working with adults and asking questions of adults, for them asking questions of adults, not you asking questions of adults. And I think that there is a lot to be gained from providing some of the structures that might be needed to get through a complicated process, but making sure that your son is the one who's doing all of the action items. I think things get problematic when it's the parent doing something rather than reminding or having a discussion about or making sure that they have thought about some of these aspects. But anytime a button needs to be pressed, a document needs to be uploaded, a form has to be handed to the college counseling office here at Gilman, I think it's very important that it's your son who actually is doing those action item steps rather than the parents. And then that's a clear way for you to think, okay, when am I stepping over how can I draw a line in this process? All right, we're going to talk about it during this discrete moment every week, and I'm going to make sure that it's my son who does all the specific action items. And I think that's kind of an easy way to approach it at the beginning when you're trying to think about what your role is. And I love the co-pilot analogy too.
That's great, thank you. So, and now starting with Mr. Fonts, can you share with us some of the ways that college admissions has changed? And you picked your time frame, whether it's the time you've been at Providence or the time that you've been
Well, I started when I was 12, so this is my 34th year, and it's had its cycles. I mean, it's changed dramatically for me as a professional, and certainly for students. We were talking at dinner today about how we actually read applications, and not so long ago it was paper, and we had piles of it. 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we were still reading paper files at Providence College, and we would spend hours upon hours opening the mail and putting these files together. And I kept thinking to myself, geez, this is what we went to college for and paid all that money. But it's changed, it's evolved tremendously, and everything is electronic. And the efficiencies that we've gained in this short period of time for Providence, I know Yale's been doing it. They were a leader in the clubhouse for a long time, but for us, it's changed the way we've been able to interact with our applicants, with families, with students, and that to me is the most valuable piece that we've gained as a staff. My team, yes, we still spend a lot of time and hours upon hours reading files, but we also get to engage with students. We also get to know them in a deeper way, and we have we spend more time. I think I would describe our process as very labor intensive, and that hasn't changed from the paper to the electronic for us, because at Providence College, we choose to recalculate every high school transcript. That's one thing that's remained.
We're going to get to that later, don't worry.
We will get to that later, and it's different. But as far as a change is concerned, technology, that's the big change for us in the last, at Providence College. Technology has changed the landscape. It's made us more efficient. It's given us the opportunity to travel more effectively, to communicate with students more effectively, and to me, that's a huge benefit. Everyone wins in that scenario. The professionals win, but so do the students and the parents and the families, because our information is better. It's better. How we communicate with families has changed, and it's changed for the better. The information we provide, the timeliness of the information is just so much better.
I'll let you pick who wants to go next.
I think, too, being on the other side of things from the families and students' perspective, I've only been in the profession for the last 11 years, but it's really interesting to me to see how students and families can utilize our websites for information. So before, there would have these really boring catalogs that we'd get in the mail, and there wasn't a lot to them. And now I think it's nice that you can go on a virtual tour to UCLA tomorrow if you want, or tonight on your phone. Right now, you could be going to school on your phone right now. I think that that's another really nice piece, is just the amount of research you can do electronically, and to find the most up-to-date information and how to plan your visits and how to schedule your visits. I mean, a lot of what we used to have to do on the phone is now done through really great platforms. And as a consumer of this information, I think it's nice that you have the ability to look at schools that you might not have even known existed, because you can do searches online and you can find better matches that you never knew were out there.
Yeah, and I think the quality of that content is just so dramatically better. I mean, just thinking about the virtual tour resources on our website compared to what they were even 10 years ago, it's not even, it's embarrassing. So there's just tons of information there. And I would also just say that one of the things that's really changed is that we are, the level of selectivity at a lot of institutions has increased, because the barriers to technology has lowered the barriers to application, as well as the idea that students feel like they can apply more easily to more institutions. for the first time, the average number of institutions that our admitted students applied to this past year was greater than, for years it had always sort of been below 5, below 6, but now it's sort of approaching 7 or 8 per student, admitted student, and I think that's just because we're seeing more and more students use the technology. More and more students are getting the great information about colleges and being interested in more schools and understanding that we're very fortunate to live in a country with hundreds or thousands of great institutions. If you're about to find this out, if you haven't been through this process before, but your son is about to become never more popular in terms of mail to your home, right? And they should enjoy this, because when they're our age, all they get in the mail are bills. So they have to enjoy the material that they're going to get. But they're about to get inundated with brochures and other materials that they will maybe just gather dust in the corner of the dining room. I don't know, but there's lots of different opportunities. And then the last point is that the technology and just the way that the higher ed is much more accessible is that there's lots of students applying more across the country and more globally than they ever had before. The idea of distance in the U.S. being a real barrier is I think falling by the wayside, and so it might be easier for your son to imagine themselves in California at an institution, or even in Connecticut at an institution, if it's much easier to pick up the phone and FaceTime mom and dad, or there's just the ability to get information back and forth is so much dramatically improved. So I think there's a lot of potential for students to be thinking more globally about their education and the choices that they have than they have in the past.
Thank you. Quick question though, the 7 apps per student, is that a Yale specific number, or is that an average?
That's just our internal data about the number of institutions that are admitted students. It's not, we don't even have the data for all of our applicants. And that doesn't, so that's the sort of the average number that students are applying to. It's a little bit over 7.
Okay, thank you. So there are thousands of colleges, degree granting institutions in the United States. How do we get to know some of these schools? So, Mr. Quinlan, can you start off and share some of the ways an applicant can get to know a college? What should he be looking for? What are some good questions to ask? And how does one make the best use of the campus visit?
That's a lot of questions. I'll start with the first part. I mean, I think one of the best things to do, is start locally, right? Before you invest in a long road trip, which can be wonderful and provide lots of great conversations with your son. You probably, let's say you're heading north from here. There are on the I-95 or Amtrak corridor, there are going to be hundreds of institutions for you to choose from. Before you even do that, you might want to just say, okay, let's figure out what's within driving distance for the day. So my brother actually went to Goucher College here in Baltimore, Maryland, still lives in Baltimore. You could look at Goucher, you could look at the University of Maryland, you could look at St. John's, you could go to Washington, D.C. and look at Georgetown. If you thought maybe, you'd want to, is it worth going up to see Providence? Go and take a look at Georgetown. You could take a look at American or GW, and literally within, maybe not all of them, but you could sort of spend 3 day trips and get a good cross-section and try to at least begin to understand what your son might be interested in across lots of different dimensions. And the other big piece of advice I would give you, besides start looking locally, because that will just be a better use of everyone's time and money, is to create a very simple rubric of a few things. And don't immediately eliminate institutions because they don't check every single box of what your son might think is important or you might think is important. I think because there's so much choice, students use, and parents use, very easy bifurcations to help them navigate all their choices. I only want to go to a big school. I only want to go to an engineering school. I only want to go to a school that plays Division I sports. Okay, those are interesting things to say, but does it need to be all 3 of those things? Do we care about one of those more than the other? So what I would recommend you do is basically just create a very simple sort of rubric: academic opportunities, non-academic opportunities, size, location, and cost. And then decide, okay, which of these, we are not going to hit the green checkbox on all 5 of these, But let's start thinking about schools as we view locally that can help us sort of guide our search. I think too many schools are eliminated at the front end of the process because they're small, or they're not engineering, or they don't play D1 sports. It actually might turn out at the end of the process that your son cares much more about academic fit or location than he does about D1 sports, and then he's taken some really great location and academic fits for him out of the running. So I think you should not be thinking in sort of just quick, this is this type of school or that type of school, and do a slightly more complicated check mark about different institutions as you begin to sort of build that search list.
That's great.
For the visit, I will definitely share that I always think it's important for families to go off-road when they're visiting campuses, even though I'm the campus visit coordinator and I don't want to give this advice. I do think it's important that you don't do just what we've orchestrated for your visit. So we have tour guides that are trained. We have information sessions provided by people who are trained. We show you around the best places on our campuses. But really, you need to go off-road to see what life is really like at our different institutions. So do those things, do the tour, do the info session, but then also just take a walk and just interact with students that are in line at the coffee shop, or go to the dining hall and walk up to, have your son go walk up to a group of kids and say, hey, how's it going? Do you like going here? I mean, whatever their comfort level is, but I think that's how they get a really good sense of just the general day-to-day atmosphere of the school. And so I think going off-road is nice so that you can really kind of see behind the curtain of what our admission offices are polishing for you. When you get there, you get a better idea of kind of what the real day-to-day can be.
Yeah, I like both of those. I like, in particular, the rubric. Everyone should have the makings of a list and how you set it up and how you follow it. But there's so many things that you want to go to a website and see what the opportunities are at the individual, because they're going to be different at all three of our institutions. The opportunities for that visit are going to be different, and they're going to be different based at the point that you're visiting. Are you visiting as an inquiry, just you haven't even applied yet? Are you visiting after you got admitted? Are you visiting, as a second or a third time? Because there's so many different programmatic opportunities out there that you should get an idea, by visiting the individual websites. The websites are incredible, and you're going to have a ton of information available. But just to try to organize that information, I think the spreadsheet, the rubric, the simple, these are the opportunities, these are the different types of visits there are. You may not need a group information session if you've already had the counselor visit your son's high school. You might not need that. You may want to do an interview. You might want to sit in on classes, which, at certain points in the process might be available to you. You might want to go to an open house. You might not want to go to an open house. You might want to just drive there and go rogue and ask any student that's just random about their experience. Sitting in the dining hall. Oh, yes, we know guys eat. And so you got to go to the dining. I mean, that's a must-have. You've got to check out the food because every guy's led by their stomach. So, I mean, you got to really go to the dining hall and see what that experience is like. And not, you want to go to where the students actually eat, not where, the other dining facilities. You want to go where are the freshmen eating the majority of their meals. So that's a little advice.
Great, thank you. Now let's get to the actual application. So can you share with us how admission decisions are made? So Mr. Fonts, can you please discuss the role of the transcript, and then we'll talk about testing and essays and recommendations. So first, the transcript.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the transcript, I think it's the one thing that 99% of admission officers will agree is, if it's not number one, it's 1A. And for us at Providence, it really is. I mean, when I review a transcript, I'm not even looking at the grades. The grades it's not the first priority. It's what is the student taking? how has he changed from his freshman year to his senior year? What am I looking at? Providence, we're pretty labor intensive when it comes to the transcript, and that's what we were alluding to earlier, in that we recalculate every transcript at Providence College on our own 4.0 unweighted scale. We did that last year for 11,423 applications. Yes, that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And we used to do it by hand. 8 years ago, we were doing it by hand. Anna knows. She did it. Now, technology's helped us to improve the process dramatically. When I talk about a transcript, I talk a lot about appropriate challenge. Those two words, to me, matter the most. You know, there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of hearsay, and there's a lot of advice given to parents and to families and to students. We really have to look at the individual student when we talk about how to challenge oneself. I always think that, you know, everybody thinks that, you know, you got to take an honors or an AP in every academic subject, but I think that's not necessarily going to be appropriate for a lot of students. I think of what are the student's strengths. Where do those strengths lie? Is this student stronger in the humanities? Is the student stronger in the math and science area? And if those are the areas that he feels the strongest, well, then that's where I say perhaps the increased challenge should be in those strengths. I think that's seeing that progression, that growth from freshman to sophomore, sophomore to junior, junior to senior is what I'm talking about when I'm reviewing a transcript. We're not counting non-academic subjects. Our grade point average in many cases will look very different than the ones that many students have or think they have, because many schools use weighted grade point averages. So we're only looking at English, math, science, history, or social science, and foreign language, and because we're Catholic, religion or theology would get factor in, and very selective electives. So we are looking at a grade point average in those areas of our unweighted scale. We're plugging in the grades, and now the computer does the math, thank God. But I've gotten really good at adding in my head, and that was a skill I gained from doing it the old-fashioned way. But I think it's really important not to think in terms of I've got to take every AP or I've got to take every honors, but think about your own individual son and what advice you can talk about, and that is, A, what do you enjoy? What do you like? What are the subjects that you feel really confident and strong, and do you feel you can take that next step? Do you feel like you might have started out in a regular curriculum and you want to see if, you know, if honors is available? Can you step up the challenge to an honors? And you get to junior year and you've built this foundation, because that's what we're talking about. That's what you do. You build a foundation and you grow from it, and you try to improve from that foundation. And then you get to junior year and you say, wow, I've done well. I've done B+ work in an honors course. Wow, maybe I can take an AP in English, or maybe I can take an AP in science or in language. But it doesn't have to be this mentality that I've got to take an AP or an honors in every single academic subject, except for maybe my friend here. But I don't, you know, at Yale, there might be kids that don't have an AP in every single subject.
I'll use that as the pivot to transition.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even if you're not recalculating your the transcript like we are at Yale, the transcript, it tells a story. It's a document. appears on the screen. It's actually the first document that we look at when we review a file before we even get to the student's own application. And we don't try to look at a specific number. We don't get too hung up in 4.5 versus 4.3 versus 4.1. In fact, many times we don't even look at what that number says because we're much more interested in the story beneath the number. We look at all 4 years of grades, and as Earl just mentioned, there's various stories that a transcript can tell you, whether it's meeting academic challenge, pushing through and improving grades, if you had an academic wobble early on in your high school career. It can tell a story about the different things you might be interested in based on the choices you've made with your curricula throughout high school. So we actually are not getting that focused on counting up scores, grades, and numbers, and classes of this type or that other type. We really want to see the full document in front of us. We want to sort of look at the story that it will tell us, and then move on to the student's part of the application, which we'll talk about next.
Okay, great. And so, Ms. Jacobson, will you please discuss how your school uses the SAT and the ACT, and also explain your test optional policy?
Sure. So at Franklin and Marshall, we are happy to take the SAT or the ACT. We do super score both exams. So if your son sat for multiple SAT tests, we take the best score from the verbal and then the best score from the math. We don't look at the writing portion of either exam, but I will tell you that we are able to read the writing section of that portion. So fun side note story. One time I was just curious to see what this student, the essay was very well written and everything was very well written, but this student didn't have really great English grades. And being an English major that I was, I thought, that's weird. So I thought, let's just take a little look-see at the SAT essay. And the SAT essay was, this kid wrote, like Bart Simpson used to do in The Simpsons, I just want scholarship money, I just want scholarship money, I just want scholarship money. Like the whole time, I don't even know how long that test is. Long. I mean, I stopped.
40 minutes.
40 minutes. 40 minutes of I just want scholarship money. So needless to say, we do have the ability to read that. Hopefully it would have been an essay and not that, but fair warning. So we do super score both exams. At F&M, we believe that not everyone is a great test taker, and so because of that, we leave it to the student to decide whether or not they'd like to submit their score. If students want to submit their scores, that's great. We will take them. They can choose to not send any scores at all. So at F&M, your SAT scores or ACT scores are just one puzzle piece of a very large puzzle. And so if your student says, I'm not really proud of this puzzle piece, or it doesn't reflect who I am as a student, or it's the weakest part of my application, or maybe every time you took it, they did worse than the time before, all 4 times. Well, that's just me. Okay, got it. So we let them decide if they want to submit their scores. And so if they're not going to submit their SAT scores or ACT scores, all of their other puzzle pieces are just going to get a little bit bigger to take that spot from having the scores being something that they submit. There's a lot of schools out there that don't necessarily recommend standardized testing. Some schools will require an interview instead. Some schools will require essays instead. There's a lot of different things. And so, I mean, again, you're in a great place. The Gilman counselors can definitely help give you some ideas of other places if your student is not a great test taker. And I think it's important for students not to think, this is something else I see, oh, well, I got a 1480, so here I come Yale, I'm going to Yale. If their transcript's a wreck, they're not going to get into a lot of places. It has to be part of, the SAT scores is just one part of their application. That's not a golden ticket. If you do really well testing, then we want to see your transcript shows that you're also a really good student. A lot of times, it's so disappointing to see a transcript that's not great and not stellar because that kid's just not showing up day after day in the classroom, but they were able to show up for a test on a Saturday and they knocked it out of the park. That is so infuriating, and I don't have any kids, but that will be something that I'm gonna knock into my kids' heads. So again, I think there's a lot of stress about standardized testing and that's the golden ticket, or I gotta wait to get my scores and I want to wait and see what they are. I think that there's a lot of pressure about that, and I think, again, you're in great hands here with Gilman to figure out, where our averages are. All schools have profile averages of our admitted students, so you can get a better idea of what do our admitted student scores look like, and you'll have a better idea. Not saying that if you don't get a 1600, you're not admitted, but that does give you a better idea of what we're looking for. Again, a lot of schools are holistic remission, so it's not just your scores, and keep in mind, I think about this a lot because of the electronics and the technology that we're in. Because of the world that we're in, we're employed for a reason. And so if a computer could do our jobs, then we'd all be out of jobs. And so if it was just a score and just a GPA, we would all be unemployed. It's not that easy. There's so many other things that go into it, and so keep that in mind, especially with the testing. That's not just the one, the magic bullet that's going to get you in somewhere. That's just one part of a very large puzzle. And for those students that aren't great test takers, it's not that they're not going to go to college. There's plenty of colleges that will take students that don't submit their scores or that have lower scores.
Yeah, we're test optional as well, and about 40% of our applicant pool does not submit test scores to us. We've been test optional since 2008, so just over 10 years now. This is the 11th year. And it's among the best decisions that we've ever made, just because it's so mission related to Providence College for access purposes. It does somewhat level the playing field for those students, as you mentioned, who don't feel that their test scores are indicative of the student that they are, that the work that they've done day in and day out. We studied it for 4 years before we went test optional, and we felt that because we recalc grade point average and we score curriculums, that was as good a predictor of their success at Providence as the test scores. And we proved it to be accurate because the performance was no different for a test taker submitter versus a non-submitter to Providence College. Their GPAs at Providence were virtually identical.
So what's interesting, we require the tests at Yale, either the SAT or the ACT, and we have actually found that it does predict students' academic success over the course of 4 years on top of their high school GPA. Because we don't recalc all the high school GPAs, we're comparing apples to bananas to oranges sometimes in that. The way we think about testing is it helps us answer one very preliminary and basic question is, can the student do the work? We don't get too hung up in the differences between, 20 points on the math SAT. The question is, though, looking at the student's testing profile and looking at these students' grades, can they do the work at Yale to be successful? We're very fortunate that the answer to that question is yes for 2/3 of our applicant pool. So last year we got 36,000 applications to Yale College. 24,000 or so of those applicants had essentially the same academic GPA and test score. So the answer is not yes or no, the answer is just basically yes. And then we look at other things like the stories that the transcript could tell, and when I talk about essays and recommendations, we'll talk about those things, because that's what's truly differentiating students in our applicant pool. We really, because we have so many applications from all over the world and all over the country, we really find that the testing helps us provide one data point that can be compared nationally and internationally. And so we do ask, when we open up that file, the first question my readers ask themselves is, I see the testing and I see the transcript, can the student do the work? If the answer is yes, then I will look at the transcript more holistically and I will read the entire application to figure out what else we want to learn about this individual applicant.
So let's jump to the other parts of the application, the essays and recommendations. So Mr. Quinlan, can you talk about the role of those two items?
Sure. I got the fun part. Sorry, guys. So once my staff have reviewed that preliminary academic profile of the student and answered that question, then they open up the application and they get to read. They get to look at the extracurricular activities that a student participates in, and they get to look at the essays. And then after that, they can look at the letters of recommendation. And it is in these parts of the application that students can really differentiate themselves in our applicant pool. I will focus specifically on essays and recommendations, although if we want to circle back to extracurriculars, or if someone else wants to take a swing at that, go for it. The letters of recommendation, especially at a place like Gilman, can be incredibly helpful because your sons have, hopefully over the course of 4 years here, developed very good relationships with the faculty here at this institution. And people here have been writing letters of recommendation. They've been writing good letters of recommendation at Gilman for 100+ years, or however old the institution is, right? So, and the counseling staff here knows your son well, and so they can write a detailed letter of recommendation. The key here is your son should ask themselves which 2 teachers are going to spend the most time that they have in their busy lives writing me a very good differentiating letter of recommendation. Teachers are busy. They are teaching classes, college counseling, and coaching JV golf, although that does sound like a good gig, right? So you want to be able, but that's busy. So if this person's also then going to get home and spend an hour of their non-existent free time writing a letter of recommendation for your son, you want to make sure that they're choosing the right person to do that. Sometimes people think, I want to choose the AP US History teacher to do that. I know you don't have APs in the humanities, but I want to choose the junior US History person to do that, or the person who's on the faculty who went to Yale. Those are fine people to ask, but that's not the reason you should be asking them for letters of recommendation. It's because they know you so well, they know your son so well, and they know your son, they like your son so much that they're going to spend some time writing a detailed letter of recommendation that really differentiates them from the thousands of other very smart, very talented young men in our applicant pool. The letters of recommendation are, for the most part, they're, we'll read like 5 letters of recommendation a year that are not positive. Student doesn't do their homework, has an attitude problem, etc. But we will read thousands of letters of recommendation that are very positive. But then there's the really sort of the smaller percentage of letters of recommendation that truly separate students out in the applicant pool. And you have to think about who's going to write those things for you. While we're at the letters of rec, because I don't want to leave this topic without dealing with extra letters of rec, I'll also just address this briefly. More is not better in this process. That actually sounds counterintuitive, but when you think about applying to a school with a very selective admit rate, where all of the components of the application need to be excellent, the more you send us, the higher chance it is that what you are sending us no longer separates your son out in our applicant pool and actually begins to read more like the warm, lukewarm letters of recommendation that we see thousands of times over that will not help the offer of admission here. So my advice is you should send, if necessary, only 1 additional letter of recommendation from a coach, a Boy Scout troop leader, a pastor, an employer, a research mentor, someone who knows your son in a completely different context and knows them very well, and that is not even required. Most of the students we admit to Yale, in fact, I looked at this because I wanted to have this data point exactly for this moment, 80% of the students we admitted to Yale last year submitted 2 letters of recommendation, all right? This is not something that needs to be is prevalent or as you may think it is, and not something that needs to become a dramatic part of the application process. And more is not always better. Do not ask another English teacher, your next door neighbor, and your congressperson who you met yesterday to write additional letters of recommendation. I am inundated with recommendations from Yale alums who are writing on behalf of their friends' children. Best not to send those. The other thing I would say about essays, for a more brighter topic, is this is a great opportunity for your son to differentiate themselves in our applicant pool. This is not, it is kind of a great moment for them to think, okay, my transcript tells this story, my testing says this about my academic preparedness for the institution, my recommendations are going to probably say this about me, I have a general sense of how I'm thought of around the school. What else can I tell the committee that will help them get a good sense of who I am? Essays should be reflective, they should be personal, they should be written in the first person, the second person is weird, the third person is scary, all right? Do not get your essays over-edited. You would be surprised, or maybe you would not be surprised, by the number of essays that we read that sound like they have not been written by 17-year-olds, but actually by 47-year-old lawyers. Right? Mm-hmm. So many 47-year-old lawyers writing essays to Yale these days. And let me tell you something. They're not the essays that are differentiating students in the applicant pool. Because either they're too safe and they're not providing any glimpse into the personality, or they're over-dramatized. This is a new trend. In the last 3 years, I have read so many essays from students who feel, because Yale is so selective, that they need to write incredibly dramatic renderings of life events. This is not what the admissions committee wants to read. I'm not even trying to be that joking.
You're not
Like,
even
this,
embellishing
this
that,
is
are
no. This is just like every third essay is very over dramatized. So what I would encourage your son to do is think about, okay, what can I tell them that tells them more about me? What can I emphasize? What your son chooses to write about is almost important as how well they write the essay. All right, because we're not really that interested in the perfect piece of prose and the amazing Ernest Hemingway quote. You should get your essays proofread. Don't spell Yale D-U-K-E, all right, or something else like that. But you definitely want to not have these essays over-edited, and you need to help your son say, you know what, AP English teacher, you know what, next door neighbor, you know what, mom or dad. This is my essay to college, and the most important thing that the person can get out of this is to understand who I am and what makes me tick. And if I make these edits, that's going to be completely gone away. Your son should be able to walk into that building that I was just calling my 3-year-old daughter outside of, whatever that library building is, drop their essay into that building with no name on it, and another classmate of theirs should be able to pick this up, and either because of the topic of the essay or the tone of the essay, should be able to say, you dropped your essay to college, because I know that you would be the person in the senior class who would write this essay to college. That is the best piece of advice I can give in terms of the essay. I've read great essays about Harry Potter. I've read terrible essays about Harry Potter. I've read great essays about swim meets. I've read terrible essays about swim meets. There is no right or wrong topic. It's how the topic your son chooses connects with their interests and other parts of their application to really differentiate themselves out in our applicant pool. Okay, that's enough, sorry.
I will add one quick thing. I think a lot of times students have writer's block because they feel like they need to have the Oprah aha moment.
Right.
And I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I don't know if I've had that moment myself. So I think it's hard for a 17-year-old, especially a boy, to think, what do I want them to know about who I am? Who am I? Because then that gets down the dark path of who am I? And then it's philosophical, and yeah, we read a lot of
I
those
don't think
there
that path
too.
has to be so dark.
Right, it's just easy on the drama. But I do think it's important for them. Some of the best essays I've read have been about really silly topics, like picking deodorant. That's my all-time favorite essay, was about picking deodorant. So a lot of times students are thinking they have to have this life-changing, award-winning mission trip to Ghana thing to have happened to them, and it's not necessarily it's just like he said, it's not necessarily the topic as much as it is what it reveals about your son.
Yeah, I totally agree. The best essay I read so far this early action cycle to Yale was one about their family's minivan.
Right, yeah.
That's great.
Deodorant, one of my other ones was about writing, a student her first job was writing on cakes and didn't know how to write icing on cakes. I mean, like, these aren't solving, world hunger issues. It's just like a really good essay that I felt like I knew that student's personality from what they shared in that portion of the essay.
I love the idea that any student here should be able to pick somebody else's essay up and understand who that student is, because you are trying to tell a story. You're trying to, for us, it's like putting the pieces together. You use the puzzle analogy, and I like that because, when we think about extracurricular activities as another piece of that puzzle, you might have learned that, he's an incredible tuba player from the essay. He went to some national competition, and this is important, and I think extracurriculars are there because it helps us build a class in some cases. It really does. We don't, not every student is going to be the same, and they're all going to bring different things to the table, and I see the extracurriculars as a complement to the rest of the application. It's not about the quantity. Nobody's counting the number of activities your sons are involved. It's not about, it's the depth. It's what they want to perhaps continue to participate in, what they might bring to our community and continue to do. And we know that students who are involved do better. We know that if they're involved, they tend to do better academically. They manage their time better. But it's not artificially embellishing your resume or building this. It could be one or two things, and that's something that they really, really are, I don't want to say passionate about, but they're involved. They're heavily involved. They want to do something. They might want to continue to participate. They might want to continue to participate. So it'd be good for us to understand those things.
Great. So you mentioned building a class in discussing and looking at extracurriculars. Can you also talk about the way a class is built through athletic recruits, through the arts, through legacy students, and underrepresented students? So, Mr. Quinlan, would you like to start?
I'm glad he went to you.
Because you got the easy one last
Yeah,
time.
that's good. That's true.
You did. You got the layup.
I mean, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to this answer. And just describe briefly sort of how the process works at Yale, because that, I think, helps sort of how this works. And we basically divide up the world into 25 different geographic portfolios. So I have 25 admissions officers. Each of them gets assigned a geographic portfolio. There's someone in my office who's been reading applications from every applicant from the state of Maryland for at least a decade. She's fabulous. Her name's Lindsay Acevedo. I will gladly give you her email address after this. And so it's her job actually to do that initial read of every application from Gilman. Answer that initial question, is the student competitive or not? Is the student academically able to do the work? And then read the essays and recommendations and extracurriculars, and sort of decide, is this student someone that I'm interested in moving? They then send it off to be read by a second person. The second read comes back, and then it's Lindsay's job, of those in Maryland who have been read twice, present a certain number of those students to the admissions committee. And at Yale, we have a 5-person admissions committee, and it consists of 3 admissions officers, a member of the faculty, and a dean in the college. And we literally meet every day through February and March to make admissions decisions, and we go through the world geographic portfolio by geographic portfolio to help us make decisions. So there will literally be a day where we will review all the applications from the state of Maryland, and Lindsay will come in, and she will have decided who are the committee sees a docket of all of the applicants, but she has decided, okay, here's the sort of 60 kids that we're going to hear today from the state of Maryland, and the committee will then vote of those 60 kids who to admit. We don't keep a tally. We're not looking to admit 30 kids, and if that's done by lunch, we break for the rest of the day. We literally go through and spend the whole day reviewing the kids. It's a very long, time-consuming process. You can see the havoc that this has wreaked on my waistline over the last few years. And the idea is we get to know the student. We are a 5-person committee that has the parts of the application on a screen in front of us, so we can talk about the essays, read the letter of recommendation that's in question, take a look at the transcript together. And so she makes a presentation, the committee reviews the file, and then we vote on the candidate. So this is an incredibly time-consuming, person-intensive process. And it's through that we will consider things like, is the student supported by the athletic department? Is this student underrepresented minority? Is this student a legacy student whose father or mother went to Yale? And those are things that we will consider in the process as positive aspects of the process, but again, nothing that we quantify, because the whole process is very whole person. There's no specific formula that goes into it. These are sort of thumbs on the scale as we move through. The groups that we're specifically affirmative for, just to be very clear, are sons and daughters of Yale alumni, first-generation students, people who will be going to college, first members of their family to go to college, underrepresented minorities, African-American, Latinx, Native American, and then those who are supported by our athletic department for our 35 Division I sports. And those are the things that we would sort of be consideration in the process. But everyone goes through the same process. And then with about 10 days left, I take a snapshot of where we are in the class, see where we are, and this is where the class building comes in. And then I make everyone bring all of their admitted students back through a final review committee with the knowledge of where we are through the class to do the final shaping and to get from what we're usually, basically to decide if a student's going to be on the wait list or admitted. And that is sort of how we do the final calculation. But it's really every student considered on their own merits, case by case, throughout the entire process. That's the kind of a way to answer your question.
That's great.
I don't even know how to follow that up. There's so many questions that, there are a lot of schools that have very similar, and basically what we're trying to do is get from that, in his case, 37,000, in my case, 11,500, down to the number that you want to admit. And you're right, we use a geographic breakdown, and there's 16 on my staff, and they are all assigned a geographic region, and we get, they are all responsible for the first read, and then in teams of 2, they do a second review, and then that narrows it a little bit easier, and then we have 2 committees of 8 each. And that's where we get to hopefully the final number. There is, there's more pressure, I think, for athletics at Providence. There's, if there's a 7-footer that our coach really wants, then I'm going to hear about it. And I think we treat athletics in kind of a tiered system. So men's and women's basketball and men's and women's ice hockey at Providence are the top tier. And then soccer's and lacrosse, and I'm probably forgetting somebody, still there's a middle band, and then there's swimming and tennis, which are non-scholarship sports at Providence. But we still want to help those teams. But there's 5 athletic liaisons on my staff. They are all communicating with coaches. We are aware, or we should be aware, of any student athlete who's being recruited. And we do a pre-read for every athlete at Providence, so we're well aware of them, and we give them an idea of where their admissibility stands in advance of their application to Providence. So it's similar, but there are going to be differences, and certainly the number of students selected is certainly going to be different.
At F&M, we don't get nearly as many as my colleagues do. We just this year, we're just hitting the 7,100 mark and growing, so we're excited to see where we land this year. But at F&M, I am one of the readers of all of the apps in my geographic territory, so I am the second reader for that. We have another reader that reads everything through once, then I get it, I read everything through a second time, and then we go to committee. And committee is a very long time period of long days where we literally will go around the room, there are 9 of us, and we committee every single application.
Wow.
Even if both of us say admit, even if both of us say deny, I know, guys. We still talk about every kid. Every kid gets their moment in the spotlight.
Great,
We talk
that's
about.
great.
If you can do it, if you can do it.
So we have 7,100. It's a record-breaking year, but we really want to give everyone the chance. We want everyone to look at everything. My colleagues are looking at the same things we were looking at, and again, the geographic part's nice. So, being that I've been at F&M for as long as I've been, I know a lot of the schools, and so like again, Gilman, I know the ins and outs of Gilman, and it's great to have your sons attending such a great place where we have those relationships. And so that's the way that we do things at F&M, in having every person get read twice, and then every person gets committed.
Great. So we're going to have 3 more topics, and then we'll open the floor up to your questions. So the next is the role of an early application, whether that's early action or early decision. Can each of you share your early application options, and perhaps if there's benefits of applying early, what those are? So Mr. Fonts, why don't you please start?
So I would describe us as offering the full menu. We have early action, early decision, regular decision, and early decision 2.
Wow, good for you.
That is the full menu. Is there a difference between applying early action and early decision? Absolutely. Absolutely. We admitted about 70, I think it's about 77% of our ED1 candidates. We admitted 51% of our early action candidates, and last year I think we admitted 37% of our regular decision candidates. So there is a difference. There's a lot of talk about demonstrated interest. To me, demonstrated interest is ultimately applying early decision. that's how you can demonstrate interest to Providence College. You can apply early decision, and it's clear that we're admitting more of them because, and the volume is night and day. I mean, we received 65-45 early action. We received 326 early decision 1. We're going to probably get another 150 ED2s, and we're going to get another 4,500 regular decision candidates. So over 60% of our pool is coming early, and that's presented an interesting challenge.
Ms. Jacobson, when you talk about your early options, can you share a little bit about what the commitment is in early decision?
Sure. So at Franklin and Marshall, we have 2 rounds of early decision and then 1 round of regular decision. Early decision being a binding agreement, so parent signature, student signature, and counselor signature, just so everyone's on the same page. At F&M, because it's a binding agreement, we will offer early financial aid estimates before you sign that agreement because we want you to have all the information up front. So you're able to get your financial aid ahead of time before you decide if you want to go into the early decision agreement with us. At F&M, we're entirely need-based for aid, so we don't have any merit or scholarships. So it's nice to be able to receive your family's package because it's based 100% on your family's demonstrated need with what that would be ahead of time. At F&M, we generally take about half of our class through early decision 1 and 2. And this year we had a 20% increase in early decision 1 applications. So we took a little bit more than we normally do in early decision 1. And we're already trending up for early decision 2 and regular decision. We're experiencing an app increase this year. So there is an advantage. Our admit rate is very different. We do admit more students through the early decision 1 and 2 rounds. Last year, our early decision 1 and 2 admit rate was about 64% versus our admit rate for regular decision dropped to about 31%. The caveat, though, being that it is a binding agreement. And so early decision's kind of like, we say it's like a marriage. So you don't want to do the proposal. You don't want to go through the whole thing if you're going to back out at the altar at the last minute. And so we do have a lot of students that apply regular decision. It's just the admit rate will be very different for those students.
So we have an early action deadline and a regular action deadline. Ours is restrictive early action, which is another choice on the menu, which is non-binding. So if you apply to Yale Early Action, you're more than welcome to apply to public institutions or other institutions for regular decision, but you cannot apply anywhere else early action or early decision. So you can't apply Yale Early Action and F&M early decision. It's restrictive in that way, but it's non-binding, so you can apply other places, and if you get in to Yale Early Action, we would love it if you ripped up all the rest of your applications and danced around the house. But you're actually but you're more than happy to apply other places. We have a slightly different sort of just the math is slightly different for us, but what I would say for the real benefit to applying early action to Yale is you can get an early read on your application and might be able to sort of wrap the process up if you're feeling particularly prepared for the college application process by December. My advice for Yale specific on early action, however, is that do not work hard to rush an application that is not as strong as possible. Because of how selective we are, it is not worth applying to Yale when your application is not at its strongest point. So if you need more time in the fall of your senior year to get more grades that might improve on an academic wobble in your junior year, or you need more time to write the essay, or you need more time to get the latest testing in, or your letters of recommendation are just a total mess right now, it is not worth rushing to apply by our first deadline, November 1st, rather than our second deadline, January 2nd. There's no preference in the committee's eyes if you're applying early action or regular decision, but you want to make sure your application is as strong as possible when you do hit submit.
So this is a complicated menu in terms of admission type. So our office, your son's counselor, is here to help explain that to you all and to your son. So don't feel like you have to know all the answers right now. We are here to help. So moving on to the demonstrated interest piece. Can each of you share how your office defines it? Does your office use it? And how that plays in how admission decisions are made in your school, right? Your school. Ms. Jacobson, can you begin, please?
Sure. So at F&M, we do track demonstrated interest. We're looking for an incoming first-year class of not that many students, and so we want to pick students that want to pick us back. And so when students come to tour, when they do information sessions, Those are all things that we track. Interviews are a really good way to show interest at F&M. We do have those. They're optional. They're strongly recommended, but they're not required. The interview gives the students an opportunity to have a conversation with someone on our staff, and it's nice that we're able to learn more about the student that we might not see on their application. And so these are the ways that students can show interest. It's not as easy as, just coming to Lancaster when we're not open one day and putting your name on our mailbox outside and saying you're there. It's much more about genuine interest that you've shown. Has your student reached out to me? Did they come when I visited Gilman? If they weren't able to make my high school visit, do they have questions? They can reach out to me. And at F&M, we're very much that kind of a place where, your students are gonna have the same interactions with their professors. And so being the admission rep, I also wanna do that as well. And so genuine interest is something that we really do take into account. It's not just that you've come to tour and done the info session, but what meaningful ways were you able to interact with our office beyond that? There is a line to cross, so don't be the kid that emailed me every day to tell me what they had for breakfast. That was not a fun year. And so it is, again, the genuine part of the interest is important. If they don't really want to come to F&M, I'm going to know based on the questions that they ask. I have a 2-click rule. Please don't email me if you can find the answer within 2 clicks of a website, because if I'm able to find it in 2 clicks, so can your student. So I think that that's the biggest thing for F&M is the genuine interest piece.
Well, I think it's a tougher question. I don't, we're not quantifying demonstrated interest. I think that's what I would say. But I think every institution wants students that wants them, I think there's a part to that. And I think subliminally, yeah, we're having that conversation in committee. And sometimes it's did they do the supplement? Did they interview? So while we're not quantifying it, and giving it a data point, we're not saying this person visited 5 times or this person did an interview, this person went to the visit, and we're not quantifying it that way. I think there's conversations about the level of interest that the student has, and from that standpoint, I think it's more of a, we're gauging interest, we're not really quantifying it. That's, to me, ultimately though, early decision, that's showing the most interest possible.
We don't track or consider demonstrated interest.
So now moving on to our last question about financial aid. So Mr. Fonts, what advice would you offer families who know that they will need financial aid? And what advice would you offer to families who are considering applying for financial aid but are not sure if they will qualify for need-based financial aid?
Apply, and apply on time. If you're thinking about it, if you think you're considering it, if you think there's a possibility, what's the worst thing that can happen? No, that's the worst. Yeah, I know. It takes 2 hours to fill out the profile. It takes, takes some time to fill out the forms, but I'm a huge advocate for families to filling out financial aid. I oversee financial aid. I'm not the day-to-day person in financial aid. I'm responsible for it. I'm responsible for the budget. I do review some files. I'm involved in appeals for financial aid, and I think financing an education is a conversation that needs to start happening earlier in the process, and it needs to be a realistic conversation with your sons. Maybe not right now, okay? And I'm not saying that you disregard schools by price. That's the other problem that we have here is, the intimidation factor of a $70,000 a year education is becoming, quite frankly, intimidating. It's hard to even say it. But as that price is going up, there are opportunities. There are opportunities. There are institutions like mine that offer merit-based academic scholarships, and that is part of financing the education. It's part of the financial aid award if you applied for financial aid. It would be a part of it. It would be filling some of that need. The simple advice is to perhaps look at the institutions that you're most interested in and start looking at net price calculators. I know a lot of institutions have some really good calculators that you can at least get an idea of where you stand by filling out this very simple form and getting some feedback. You can get an idea of where you would possibly have qualified for some need-based aid. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they're 100% accurate, okay? Because many of them they're not going to calculate merit. They don't know about academic merit. But from a need-based perspective, they can be very, very helpful. You guys want to add to that?
I think another thing to echo is just about being realistic and honest with one another, and that goes for parent to parent and parent to student. Another one of my analogies I always say is, don't let your son test drive a Maserati if you have a Honda budget in mind, and I drive a Honda, so I can say that. But I just think it's important that everybody's really clear and honest up front. Don't let him test drive the Maserati and fall in love with the Maserati if you aren't prepared to pay for it. And I think that that's something that is really hard with a lot of families, is, you know, having a really honest, grown-up conversation with your young son is not always fun, but I think that it's something you need to do before you start the process, so everyone's on the same page and everyone's more aware of the options that are realistic and something that you're all okay with doing. I mean, it's definitely an investment, and it's something that everyone has to be on board with, and I think it's an important conversation to have in the college search process, not the college selection process.
The last thing I would say is, building on the net price calculators, Yale and I think F&M and a lot of other institutions have something called a quick cost estimator, which is actually even a shorter version of the net price calculator. It will require no tax returns, 3 minutes, and we are striving to give you a fairly accurate range of what a Yale education could cost. And I think it's now maybe up to 50 or 60 schools that have this quick cost estimator. It's called My Intuition Quick Cost Estimator. Very, very valuable and worth spending 15 minutes. You can get estimates, a range price for 5 or 6 institutions.
Great, thank you. So, Ms. Jacobson, Mr. Fonts, Mr. Quinlan, thank you again. Let's hear it for our guests. And so now I will open the floor up to questions. So I'm gonna repeat questions just so everybody can hear. So is there a difference between something like a 740, 760, 780 on an SAT?
So the answer, and I addressed this before, the answer is essentially no. I mean, they are obviously different numbers, but the answer to the question, can the student do the work at Yale, to any of those scores would be yes. So I don't think there's any real distinction in our minds about that. No, no. No, so I get this question all the time. We do not need to do that. And I think maybe, sorry, I don't remember which one of you mentioned the range of scores that are available on our websites, but I think if you really go on and see that, you would be surprised actually at the ranges. I think the ranges are very valuable, but I think if you were going onto Yale's website thinking that the range of SAT scores for our admitted students is going to be between 740 and 800, that is not what you're going to find. Actually, the middle 50th percentile is closer to sort of 680 and 780 than it is between sort of 740 and 800. So I think going back to that can be a very helpful educational tool for you.
The second question, I asked the college advisor also, and she said that there is a change, very recent change in applications, that actually if you point out that you do not need financial aid, then you get advantage over others.
Need aware.
Yeah.
Is that what she means?
Yeah.
So the question was,
She means need aware.
are you advantaged not applying for financial aid? indicating that you,
We're need blind, so
We're need
right, that
blind.
you will
Or
not
need
apply
aware.
for financial aid.
you can take this.
So it depends, every institution does this differently, whether they're need aware, like at Franklin and Marshall, versus need blind institutions like my colleagues. So at F&M, we become need aware at the final stages of our process. So we're not gonna know a student's financial aid until the very end. And then what happens is we're not gonna go back in and take the students that are the neediest out if we haven't hit our budget. We just go back in, and that's when the shaping happens. We go back in, we take the weakest academic students out of our pool to hit our budget for our financial aid budget. It's not an advantage if you say no. It's not like the bar gets lowered for those students. It's still the same academic profile for those students. And at F&M, again, that's the very last stage of the process. You would have already been in if you were an admit, or you would not be in if you weren't able to get to that high process. Need blind institutions, they don't know your financials as they're reading, as they're committeeing, as they're doing their process. So that doesn't affect the student's admission, no matter.
But there will be schools that will do even more dramatically than what F&M just described, and they will be very frank and say, we are need aware, and not applying for aid is
An
a
advantage.
consideration in the process.
Right.
Yeah.
So there will be schools that will say that, but every school should be very transparent about the role that plays in
Absolutely.
the process.
We're need sensitive.
Great. Yes.
How important is it for a child to have decided their major
Good question.
at least
That is a good question.
It's a good question.
right now interested in everything?
Yeah, so the question was, how important is it for a student to pick or determine or know his major at this point?
I can tell you at Providence that 40% of our students in the freshman class will begin undeclared. And being a liberal arts institution, it's something that if they're not sure, we actually advise them to be undeclared and to explore and to try different courses, because that might spark an interest that they truly want to study. So if they don't know, it's not something that I would advise forcing them into selecting something if there's an undeclared option offered. And I believe a lot of places have that undeclared option.
At F&M, we're a liberal arts school, so no one declares a major till the end of their sophomore year on purpose. We don't want to pressure students into choosing their major until they get to college and they're able to try on some things that maybe they didn't have the chance to take in high school. So no one's declaring a major till the end of their sophomore year at F&M.
We're the same.
Yes.
I'm sorry, wasn't the question really about what does it mean to the admissions process, not about when a student declares?
Oh, I misunderstood that.
Well, I think it's
So
sort
the
of
question was
same.
about-
I
It's the
mean,
same thing.
doesn't
though.
really, we ask students, on our application, we ask students to list 3 possible majors at Yale. We asked for 3 specifically because we don't want them to have to think about one. And then we're much more interested actually, and then we have a short answer underneath that, which is in like, I think it's 200 words, tell us why you chose those 3 majors. So we're more interested in students sort of thinking about what their academic interests are and related to our curriculum at the moment. But whether or not it's 3 life science majors or music, political science, and biology is of no interest to us. It's more about how that fits in, what the student writes about those choices and how that relates to the rest of the application.
The business school will be a little bit different. Mathematics, the importance of calculus and things like that for our business school because it's an accredited business school. There are some tougher requirements there, and some of our sciences, if the student is looking at a pre-professional track, pre-med, pre-dental, pre-vet, it could be a little bit different. But you're still, it generally isn't going to be that different.
Yes.
Oh, geez, did I say that out loud?
So the question was about scoring the curriculum at Providence.
Yeah, we do. We actually rate the strength of a student's curriculum within the context of Gilman and the Gilman profile and the opportunities that the student has, not on what they couldn't take, but the opportunities that they did take. We will rate the strength of a curriculum on a 10-point scale, where, a 6 means they basically took a standard curriculum all 4 years, but filled the 5 major subject areas in English, math, science, history, or social science, and a foreign language. And then the more honors, the more APs, and IB curriculum, college courses, it all depends. It'll all depend on what the school offers and what that profile offers, and how the student progressed.
Great, yes.
You talked about applications, but I remember with my other son, there was a lot of emphasis on the common application. Is that something that you talk about and how that sort of fits in?
Yeah, we exclusively use the Common App at Providence. And we have one supplemental essay that's our own essay.
Sorry, the question was about the common application as a
Yeah, I think
type
maybe
2
your
apply.
confusion is about how the application works. So the common application is sort of, it's one application that can be used at 800 colleges and
plus,
universities.
850, I
But then can have their own member-specific questions. So it sounds like Providence has one.
Member
We've
specific.
got 8. So if you want to apply to Yale, you take the Common App, and then we have the short answers about academic interest. We got all these. We spend a whole day as a staff cultivating application questions. We love additional application questions, right? So
We have none.
Franklin, oh, you have none? Really? Wow. Okay. So when I talk about application, I'm talking about the member-specific section, which for us is probably about 4 pages of a 12-page application. But then, I don't know if this was your also question, but at Yale, we accept 3 different applications. We accept the Common Application, the Coalition Application, and the QuestBridge application. So students can choose to apply to Yale in any of those 3 ways, and they're given the same exact consideration in the admissions committee.
Yes.
You talked about the early admission and your regular admission process. In the selection process, the way you meet with the committees and all, is it different in early action versus the regular? And how do you determine what percentage of students you're going to take in that process versus the regular?
So the question was about how the differences between early round and the regular round.
I guess you're looking at me. We use historical data. I mean, that's really a majority of my life is spent studying, analyzing, and I'm basically looking at 10 years worth of history and data and trying to formulate what we're trying to get to as far as the college, the cabinet gives us our president, the vice presidents, they'll establish, with my consultation, an enrollment goal and what we're going to, hopefully shoot for, and we have institutional priorities, but then there's a lot of historical data that we're analyzing, and we're looking at the history broken down by early action and early decision and regular decision, and yeah, that's the best answer that I can give you. I could tell you, but it would bore you, and it would we'd be here all night.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, we kind of know
it's
if there's any question, we defer applicants. So
Yeah.
if you apply early action to Yale, we denied application of 25% of our pool. So that means we knew that these were the students who, when we answered that preliminary question, the answer was no. So what we're going to do there is close their application and send them a signal they should move on and apply to lots of other institutions. But if there's any question, for about 50% of our early action applicant pool last year, we deferred them. And we consider them again in the spring when we have the context of the full applicant pool. And then we will admit some of the students that we defer. It's not a defer just to go automatically and get let down in March. We defer because we're going to take a look at you again in the committee again a few months later and then make a final admissions decision on your case.
Maybe time for 2 more questions.
Can you speak to the school profile? Obviously, I know this room would like to assume that Gilman is the most rigorous academic institution
In the world.
Does it matter that your kid is going to a school that maybe is more rigorous than another, or not as rigorous as another, and how do you evaluate that in the process?
So the question was about Gilman, the school profile, and the role that
Well,
plays at a particular institution.
Okay, she's caught. So it matters. I mean, that's why we look at context. That's why we read applications by school. That's why we consider these things by school. The school profile is something that we know deeply. The qualities of the letters of recommendation that we're going to get here are tremendous. Your son is, in an incredible place. Big picture, it really matters because, coming from a place like Gilman, the chances to be successful at a college and university are basically as high as they could possibly be, right? There is, hopefully being at a place like Gilman is worth it because it alleviates the stress of the ultimate existential outcome of college and university, right? This is, no matter if the name is Yale or Providence or Franklin or Marshall, your son is going to be well prepared to be incredibly, a very successful student and friend and peer, and those are all the most important things. And I think those matter. That is the type of stuff that can be really, really beneficial to us when we're reviewing a Gilman app. There's a certain assumption of preparedness and quality that we get here that is not the same types of questions we might be asking for students from a giant public high school where there's 1,000 kids in the senior class and no one in the school who's an adult knows this student. That doesn't mean we're not looking for those talented students and trying to respond to those students when we can. It just means that when we're approaching a Gilman application, it comes at it from a slightly different angle. But that's the same for hundreds of independent schools around the country. So I think it does matter, and I think it allows us to also look at things like the transcript and look at things like testing. And when we're asking that preliminary question about could the student do the work here, it allows us to answer those questions. It gives us a little bit more of a surety about how we're answering that question than what we would typically get if we're looking at it. So that's how I would answer that question, sort of big picture. And I don't know if we'll get to the big picture at the end, but I don't want to lose the fact that your son is in great hands throughout this process at a place like Gilman. So the outcome is ultimately going to be successful no matter what the name of the door they walk through August of 2020 is.
I think the biggest thing is just the context too. So knowing when I see an application and it is from Gilman, I do expect certain things just because of know what Gilman is. But I also don't believe in a B at Gilman is a blank at this place. A B at Gilman is a B at Gilman, and that's really important to keep the context within the student's school and what the opportunities are that student has. And I also think it's very much about the preparedness. So the critical thinking skills, interacting with professors or teachers, and just the things that they're able to do here has really set them up to be successful. And I think that that's a really great thing, so that when I do see a Gilman app, I know all of the opportunities that they've been afforded here, and I know that they're that much more ready for life at a rigorous place like F&M.
Great. Last question.
Acceptance rates. You get 7,000, you're taking 1,000. You get 11,400, you're taking 1,500. You're getting 32,000.
No.
Is there?
No. We had 11,000. 5 years ago, we admitted 61% of our applicants. This past year, we admitted 49% of our applicants. This year, we're probably going to admit about 46.5% of our applicants. That's where we've gone. And we've made, we've enrolled, we've enrolled the largest class in the history of Providence College this past year. Not intentionally, by the way. This is not, it's not always an exact science. We admitted 200 fewer. We didn't expect 100 more to show up. That data that we analyze, apparently I screwed up. I mean, it's not perfect. You don't expect, when you take fewer, more to come. But that's what's happened to us 3 years in a row. And now, so I have to plan with that in mind. So Houdini, pull that out of your hat and say, what's going to happen after you've over-enrolled by 100? You aren't obviously going to take as many as you took last year. So our admit rate has been coming down as more students have, as our yield, is what we call it, the yield has been increasing.
Great. One more round of applause. Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Great meeting you. Great meeting you.
Pleasure.
Always a
Nice to
pleasure.
meet
you.
That was a pleasure.
First of all, thank you to you for coming out tonight and for partnering with us as we move forward in the year and a half ahead of us. I hope that tonight was a great example of the talent of the people on the other side of the desk, as we like to say. And we were especially grateful to you this evening, so thank you so much for being here on a busy time of your year.
It's awesome as committee every hour.
You know, Holy Cross still does that.
I wanted to ask you about somebody. We were talking about slate and selecting, finding fraud.
We're really excited.
And somebody said,
Our
yeah,
doors
you
are
guys do
open,
something
our
with slate,
emails are flowing,
verifying, like
our
finding
phone
fraud,
lines. Do you
UN
have phones?
applications.
Don't use them very often.
International, maybe?
Yeah.
Please,
Could that be
let's
international?
get this process going. We're really looking forward to
So if I
it.
email you about it, would you pass me
Can't
over?
wait to get to know your son better and get to know you as
I
well.
know.
Thanks for coming.
That doesn't ring a bell with me either.